what we're asking for and why, and really try to go through kind of the arguments, some of which I think have gotten sort of lost in some of the issues, the other issues that have come up surrounding the rate case. I think it's fair to say that, you know, we went into this rate case with what we believe and still believe to today was a really pretty compelling story. You have a company that has the lowest rates in the state of Florida, among the best reliability. The rates in Florida in aggregate for all the utilities are below the national average. While our rates are absolutely the lowest, they would still be the lowest after we do the rate case. We didn't get here by accident. It just didn't happen. We have for a very long time really been focused on efficiency, making our system cleaner, lowering our emissions profile. And frankly, when we went into the rate case, and this with perfect hindsight was really an error on our part, feeling that we had such a strong, compelling story. Because the rates were low, because our bills were going to go down, and because we were making investments, we believe, in the things that are important to the people in Florida. That is efficiency, keeping the bills down through investments in generation that's more efficient, and renewables. But as you well know, it hasn't turned out to be quite like that. And, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about transparency, and, you know, we've always strived for transparency. It also hasn't, excuse me, it hasn't always worked out that way, at least the perception that we haven't been as transparent as we should, and the process hasn't been as transparent as it should, which is, and part I understand, part I don't completely understand, which is why I asked Bob Butterworth to come and at least give me some counsel on the process, the perceptions, you know, how do we rebuild what I think is some loss of public confidence in the system. It doesn't do us any good, and I don't think any more than it does the customers to feel like the process, they don't have confidence in the process and how these decisions are made. And I'll be happy to talk more about kind of the role that Bob has been playing, but Bob has been really very helpful in giving me, I don't know if you know him or not, he is a guy that
referring to the former Florida Attorney General who you've asked to come and
exactly
work for you.
And he has a stellar reputation. I think it's very difficult to be in public life as long as he has, under as many administrations as he has, and to come out with such a sterling reputation, it's a very, very unusual. And when you talk to him, you understand why. He's a straight shooter. He'll tell it to you like it is. And I have found his advice and counsel to be helpful as we've gone through this process. So with that, let me just kind of turn it over. If you turn kind of the first page, and I like to kind of walk through the deck. I promise you I'm not going to do every item of the slides, but at least this is a good opportunity to kind of walk through.
And I think it'd be good for the viewers to understand just a reminder of the basics. You're asking for roughly $1.2 billion a year for a rate increase.
Over, right, total over a 2-year period, right,
Right.
2010 and 2011.
Okay. And the argument you have made is that you think that there will be, in fact, a net decrease in the average bill because you project fuel costs over the period to decline more than the amount of your rate increase.
The fuel is certainly part of it, but that is also, frankly, part of the story that we haven't been as successful in getting out. You know, some have said that, look, the bills are going out exclusively have gone down exclusively because of fuel. And that's not true. They've gone out down in part because fuel prices have gone down, but in part because of all the investments that we have made to make the system more efficient. And I'll get into that a little bit in this deck, okay, if I may. So, you know, this is a company that is recognized really both, you know, in the state and recognized across the country for doing a lot of things very well. You know, we've won these awards for customer service. We have the energy, we are #1 in energy efficiency in the nation. We're 47% more reliable than the national average for reliability. We have among the lowest emissions in the country. And as I said earlier, our bills are lower than the national average. And by the way, we just got named yesterday by Platts to be the electric utility of the year. And that comes on top of having been named 3 times as the Fortune 500 most admired energy company. You never know that sometimes from some of the coverage associated with the rate case. But quite frankly, this is a company that certainly in the view of our peers and in the views of energy policymakers in the nation is considered to be, among the best. And sometimes I'm reluctant to brag too much about it, but I've come to the conclusion that if we don't do it, nobody will do it for us. So that is kind of the overview on that part. But we recognize that at the end of the day, what really matters most to customers is the bills. And in that category, I think we do pretty well. This is a ranking, and I think you've seen versions of this in the past, but this is where Florida Power & Light stands, our rates stand relative to all the other utilities in the state of Florida in '09. After this rate case, assuming we were granted everything we've asked for, we believe we would still have the lowest, if not among the lowest, electric bills in the state of Florida. The total number now that we're estimating is about $6 less per month from the average bill. And if you took our bill and you said if you paid kind of the average bill in Florida, average electric bill in Florida, our customers on average, save about $300 a year as a result of us having the lowest electric bills. We have had a strategy of, investing a lot in the business. And the strategy is investing in a way that the system becomes more efficient. And this is a concept that we probably haven't done as good a job as we can in getting it out. But the best analogy that we've been able to come up with in explaining why are we doing all these things, including projects that I'll talk about in a second, like the modernization of Riviera, but things we've done so far, is the equivalent of going out and trading in your gas guzzler car that uses 15 miles to the gallon, and then going out and buying a hybrid vehicle that produces 40 miles to the gallon. And so that when you start operating, your operating costs will go down. And fuel is such a big part of the bill. Fuel is over 50% of the bill now. So anything that we can do to make the system more efficient, to lower that fuel consumption while still maintaining the same level of output, saves customers money.
So part of this rate investment is, if you will, power plants for clunkers?
I love all my assets. I like to call them clunkers, but I would say this is power plants, more efficient power plants to replace less efficient ones. These are power plants that are still producing, but they produce at a relatively high cost and higher emissions.
One of the themes you made, I believe, in your filing was that you think this investment will result in efficiencies system-wide that will bring back savings to the customer. That
Absolutely.
was another one.
And I will go into a tad more detail on that in just a minute. But if you look at...
The more efficient power plants will not happen without the rate increase?
Well, first, let's talk about what we've done, because the rate case is really about 2 things, right? When you're talking about, it's what investments we have made that we want to get cost recovery on, and it's also setting the stage it's also forecasting investments we're going to make in 2010 and 2011 that we want to get cost recovery for. So can I come back to your question in a couple of minutes? If you look at the investments that we have made since 2002, and they have generated $3 billion of savings for our customers. So had it not...
Investments in efficiencies?
In efficiencies. So it's a combination. It's the first West County unit that we put in.
That's
it's
the Palm Beach County natural gas plant.
It's a unit at Turkey Point
In
that
Dade
came in
County.
service. It's other efficiencies that we have put in place at other power plants. Had we not made those investments, these units, our customers would have paid $3 billion more in fuel than they would have otherwise made. And this is one of the,
Roughly the last 10 years?
since 2002, so 7 years.
7 years, okay.
7 years. And again, part of the rate case is we do want to keep making more investments like this. But when people say, well, you know, it doesn't matter what the fuel price is, and you shouldn't take credit for it, I strongly disagree, because we do know that the bills would have been higher without having made those investments.
Because you've been using more fuel.
We would have
as
been
you
using
see it.
more fuel, and that's where the $3 billion came in, into the equation.
Now, just for a moment, though, explain then to the ratepayer how, if you made all those investments, isn't that just what private companies do? And why should they have to pay for it?
Because money doesn't grow on trees, right?
Okay.
It takes money. These plants, look, the third unit at West County, just to give you an example, is a unit that's going to cost nearly $900 million. Florida Power and Light doesn't generate enough cash flow, free cash flow, to fund these investments. At some point, this is no different than if you go out and you want to buy new printing presses or whatever. If your business can't generate the cash to do that, and if you look at 4 out of the last 6 years, FPL doesn't generate enough cash to pay for these investments. So you got to pay for them, and you pay for them by raising capital, and you raise capital by either issuing debt or issuing equity. And both of those types of investors, want to get paid for their investments. But it's important to note, though, that these are investments that save customers money. The things that we have done have been approved by the regulators as investments. They have passed the muster, if you would.
Mm-hmm.
The investments that we know are going to save customers money, that over the life of the plant it's a good deal for customers. The things that we're proposing, virtually everything we're proposing, has already gone through the approval cycles at the regulators. So these are not projects that are a hope or a wish or a prayer. We have spent real money developing, getting the permits. Riviera Beach, for example, virtually all the permits are done. So
in the company's eyes, you have everything but the money to pay for them.
That's one way of saying it, yes. So let me kind of go back to the base. I've hit on some of these points, but I want to make sure. These are tied. You look at it, and people also say, you have all these clauses, and the clauses have replaced increases. That's
Why don't you explain to the public and the viewers
Sure.
what clauses are?
There's several types of clauses, but in general, they fall in 2 categories. One is fuel. Fuel is a direct pass-through. So whatever fuel costs is what we pass on to the customer, not a penny more. Then there are other categories that are deemed to be immediately recoverable, right? And it primarily falls in the area of energy efficiency projects, environmental projects, where we're doing some sort of environmental remediation. For example, a scrubber at a power plant would be considered an environmental expense, and we recover the cost for that. There's a tiny little piece for hurricane cost recovery. We're still going through that part. So there's a small subcategory.
Clause is really a component of the bill.
Exactly, but it doesn't cover the sort of core capital investments that the company makes, right? It doesn't cover investments we make in transmission or distribution, and it doesn't cover some of the generation investments that we have made. And I can get a little more technical, but I think this gives you kind of enough broad enough overview. But what I want to show you in this slide is the fact that, while the total bill has gone up, the base bill has gone down. The base rates have actually gone down over time.
And the base rate, I believe, makes about 40 to 45% of the entire bill?
That's correct. And so in '85, you were paying $47.50, and it's gone down to $42. How did we do that? Combination of things. We did it because we got the system more efficient. We got our processes more efficient. In 1991, FPL had about 15,000 employees. We now have a little bit over 10,000 employees. So we're doing more with less. We also, frankly, have been helped by the economic growth in Florida. So as long as you had a top-line growth, we were growing at, as you all well know, 3.5%. Sales were growing. Despite all the energy efficiency and conservation programs we had, we were adding 100,000 customers, and usage kept going up. So the combination of all that, we were able to avoid, we could keep making the investments. We were able to avoid having to come in for a rate increase. The customers benefit from that because the base rates kept going down. And so, these things have allowed us to keep rates low.
And at a same time when inflation over that same period of time has gone up 99%. So the costs of, for medical, for our employees, truck costs, copper wire, whatever, have all gone up.
So growth to a degree was subsidizing.
Well, I wouldn't say subsidizing because we were investing for growth, but some of those investments were really being covered by the increase in revenue associated with growth.
Okay.
Okay? So, let's talk a little bit about the base increase request. What we're asking for, the base rate increase would be $8.80
Per month.
per month.
Per month.
$2.72 in 2011. But because the fuel is going down, we would anticipate that the average bill will still go down by about $6 next year. And frankly,
Now, excuse me, when you say next year, since we're,
2010, January
Okay.
2010.
okay.
When you say the fuel is going down, you mean fuel consumption or the cost of fuel?
The cost of fuel. Actually, there's a little bit of a fuel. But it goes back to, this is the complexity of what we're doing, right? It's going down, and it's going down, yes, fuel markets are down, but it's also going down. It's not going down as much as I'm getting myself tongue-tied. But because we've made the investments that we've made, it's going to be lower than would otherwise be. Think of it this way. When gasoline is $2, and you have a car,
To think pretty hard to
I
figure
know.
that one these days.
when it's $2 and you have a car you trade in your car and you have a car that mileage is 10% better, right? You now, the same amount of distance you can do for, 10% less than you did before. Right? So it takes you now $1.80 to travel however many miles you would have before. It's the same thing with us. If fuel is $1 billion and you're 10% more efficient, it's going to be $100 million less.
How much do you spend, how much does the company spend in an average year on all of its fuel?
About $5 billion, it can fluctuate widely because of the volatility of fuel prices. So
Right.
just to give you one sensitivity, $1 change in natural gas prices changes our fuel bill by $350 million. So generally, it's
And natural gas is by far your biggest fuel.
50% of our fuel, the energy that we produce. So that generates $4.5–5 billion bill. It's a huge component of our costs.
Ramon, if I could add to Joe's question, one of the areas that we've also made a big difference is by the investments we've made, we've been able to move our fleet away from certain fuels, like oil as an example, which also has a higher emissions content, but also if you look at where oil prices are compared to natural gas, they used to be more together, now they're what they call decoupled. We use a lot less crude oil, which is imported from overseas, has a different price point as well, so our fleet's a lot more efficient because of some of the natural gas we're able to use and a lot cleaner. Without those investments, we'd be buying a lot more crude oil at much higher prices and the customer would be paying for that.
Riviera Beach is oil, isn't it?
It's both oil and gas, and so that's one of the things that we'd like to do is get it completely away from oil.
Okay, let's try to get back on. So customers will see an average decrease of $6. So why are we asking for this base rate increase? We're asking it in part to get compensated for some of the investments that we've made, and we're asking for it to be able to continue to do what we've been doing all along, which is to make investments to make the system more efficient, to make the system cleaner. We think the customers have gotten a good deal because of the things that we have done. And again, as evidenced by the low rates, the high levels of reliability, we think that this has been, frankly, a winning strategy and one that we should be able to continue for our customers. people often say, why not stop doing what you're doing for a while? Right? This is a tough economic time. And for that, I'd say, look, this is not a business that you can turn it on and off. We have long development cycles. I mean, I remember I came to talk to you about Riviera Beach, 2 years ago?
Just about.
And it is just now that we have now almost concluded, all the permits for Riviera Beach. And it's going to take us, I mean, right now, we're talking about a 2014 in-service date. So these are not projects that, this is not like I can delay remodeling my bathroom, and I can delay that for 6 months. They're hard to start, they're hard to stop, and a number of the permits you get have expired.
Lifespans, basically.
If you don't have to do it, if you can't do it. So, and because the bills were going down, frankly, I think it is a good opportunity to keep making these investments. Furthermore, they generate a lot of jobs at a time that we desperately need jobs in the state of Florida. And I'm, at the sake of getting ahead of myself a little bit, if you look at all the projects that we're working on, next year they'll employ roughly 10,000 people. These are construction.
Now, is it 10,000 people who are not working now, who will be working next year?
Some of them are working in the projects now. But if you look at all the projects that are some stage under construction, so some of that includes people that are today working on the solar projects, for example. And some are people that would be hired for the modernizations, for some of the nuclear work that's also being planned. So, and these are direct jobs, right? And for which I'm sure you guys know that there's a multiplier effect of other jobs that would also be generated. So let me just go to the next section, and I promise I'll try to move a little quicker on that. So this section is, what does it mean to the customers? And it's really aimed at saying, this is what the rate case will support directly and indirectly. So in our forecast, in our financial forecast, we said we plan to spend $16 billion over the next 5 years.
Assuming you get the rate increase.
Assuming we get the rate increase, right?
Okay.
And that is, and as we talked about earlier, you can only do that if you are able to have a reasonable rate case outcome that allows you to have access to the capital markets to continue to fund these projects.
Do you want to explain, if you will, for everybody, what you intend to do? I assume that you're not going to just use the money you would get from the rate increase to make these investments. You would then use it to leverage
absolutely
other money?
Yeah, the investments that we would make, well, back up, the revenue just really goes to support the payments that you make to investors that will fund the project. And the investors will come generally in one of two categories. People that will buy FPL bonds, not unlike a mortgage on your property, where we agree to pay a set interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like not quite a government bond, not the same level of security, but it's a bond, it's an obligation to your investor. And then secondly, it is to pay people who buy shares, the so-called equity support for this. So it will be a combination of those. And the money that we collect, in part, part of it will go to pay operating and maintenance expenses, right, ongoing O&M expenses. But part of it, the earnings part, will pay for the equity. And there's also a cost associated with servicing the bonds, the interest payments associated with the bonds, which is an expense of doing business. So part of the money will go to support this. It also is required to maintain a certain credit rating because credit rating affects how much you pay, and it affects your ability to attract investors, right? And whether you're paying a return that's commensurate with the risk that people are incurring. And at the sake of digressing, I will just tell you that one of the things that this case is also about, which is it's a complicated subject to get across, and I'll try to do it in as simple a way as I can. The credit rating that the company has also has, that however we end up with after this rate case, has a direct influence on how much it costs us to do the financing for these projects. And it also has the potential to affect our ability to get cash on a short-term basis. And I probably wouldn't be as focused on this had I not lived through last year when the credit markets just completely closed up. And we depend on having quick access to short-term markets. And the reason we do is, one, fuel variances are financed through commercial paper. And
If I can just simplify that a bit, if suddenly fuel costs more, you need cash to pay for it immediately.
So just to make up a hypothetical, right? Fuel goes up $2 today.
You haven't got to make a hypothetical from 2008, I don't believe, do you? You had a
No,
spike in oil and gas prices.
But think about it. Fuel goes up $2 today, and all of a sudden, our fuel bill for next year is $700 more, $700 million more than we currently forecast. I think that's a low probability, so don't take that. But it's happened. So we go out and, we can't come to you immediately and say, you, our customers, immediately and say, oops, it's up $700 million, please. Generally in Florida, you do that over once a year. So I have to be able to find the cash, pay for that fuel, until I can come in and get cost recovery on it, which could be as long as 18 months from now. So I use that commercial paper and the access to the capital markets to do that. We do the same thing with hurricanes. That's my other big concern. When we have a hurricane, and you saw this in 2004 and 2005, we spend nearly $2 billion in hurricane cost restoration. Some of that...
Much of that, I assume, was paying out-of-state people to come and help?
Yes, yeah. That and cables and transformers and other things that go with it.
Repair parts.
About $1 billion of that, we didn't get paid for about a year. And by the way, it happened at the same time that fuel prices were going up. So we were at one point, we were financing about $2 billion between high fuel, the run-up in fuel prices, and excuse me, and the hurricane costs.
And many times they're related, because a hurricane comes through Florida and then goes into the Gulf.
And they were.
Fuel, and fuel prices go up at the same time we're spending money to restore.
Yeah, and they were in this case. So for us, maintaining a strong company, financially healthy, strong company, is very important, because we need to be able to have that kind of flexibility.
Is your credit rating strong now?
We have a very strong credit rating.
Do you think that if you don't get the full rate increase, that your credit rating will drop?
There are some scenarios that have a credit rating drop, absolutely.
Okay.
Moody's wrote an article that it could be taken down by 2 notches.
If we could here, because this would be a good chance to address this, I think, because since you filed for the rate increase and the coverage began, we've had people say, okay, FPL says my bill's going to go down even though they're getting a higher rate, because my fuel costs are going to go down more than they're getting. The question we have from readers is, what if you're wrong on the fuel?
I think that's a very fair question. And if we're wrong, the bills will go up. If we're wrong and fuel is higher than we currently forecast, excuse me, then the bills would go up higher. Now, recognize that most of or 60% of the fuel we will be using next year is already hedged, financially hedged, that we've already locked in those prices.
Basically bought it.
Mm-hmm.
We basically have bought it, financial instruments, but we basically have bought it. So, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, fuel prices went up, the bills would not go up, except you got to recognize that were it not for the investments that we have made, they would have gone up even higher. And if we don't keep making these same investments to keep making the system more efficient, to keep investing in renewables, to keep investing in the things that we've been doing and we'd like to do more of, the next time the prices of fuel runs up, the bills will be even higher. So do you want to keep making these investments and try to do whatever you can to make the system really more diverse, less dependent on natural gas prices? Or do you just say, you know, I'm going to take my chances, and whatever the fuel bill is going to be over the next few years, that's what we're going to pay. We're not going to take any actions to try to keep that down. That's one of the fundamental questions on this, right?
Absolutely.
And, you know, we believe that it's been a very successful strategy. I don't believe, by the way, that fuel prices, and I may be completely wrong in what I'm saying, I don't believe until the economy really recovers that you're going to see huge run-up in fuel prices unless, you know, we have a big hurricane next summer and it destroys the Gulf production area, or, I mean, unless there's some catastrophic event. But you know that they will go up. You know that sometime in the next 5, 10 years, you'll see another cycle where fuel prices go really high. And so, you know, we think it's a good strategy to keep doing it. And by the way, the environmental benefits, which we'll get to in a second, are also very, very important. These things are making the environment cleaner for all of us.
By lowering emissions.
By lowering emissions, absolutely. So let me go ahead and we've talked about the reliability. Sure.
You say the price will go down $6 if you get your rate increase. If you don't get your rate increase, how much lower will the price be?
It will go down, well, if we got zero an increase, it would
And
be,
you had the fuel savings. How much would people save?
what's the number? I just gave it, and I'm having a senior more. It's like $8.85. So if you had zero, right, then instead of going down $6, it would go down $14. What's my math? $14.85
Today,
today.
today. But then
Absolutely.
it will go up even more
So
later,
the question is,
because you haven't made the investments. Right.
do you then shut down all these projects?
So you're essentially saying that if you get this rate increase, it's going to be, in a way, as you see it, a hedge for customers against future big spikes. Am I reading that
It
correctly?
will have, not exclusively, right? Because part of it is greater efficiency, part of it is greater diversity in fuel consumption. Part of it is investments in renewables that have a zero-cost fuel. So I don't want to put it all through the prism of fuel, but that fuel would be the most direct, immediate contribution to the customer. There are other projects in here that we haven't talked about, which I hope I get a minute to talk about, such as Energy Smart Florida, which won't have a direct impact on fuel. They're not aimed at fuel, but they're aimed at making the infrastructure smarter, hardening the infrastructure, and ultimately giving customers options in a way that we don't have the technology to give customers today.
To use less electricity and therefore lower their bills.
And be able to make decisions on how they want to use electricity.
If we could, before you kind of move to that next section, I think Susan had a question or two. She relates right to this. I think it might be a good moment for it.
Okay. So if your story was so compelling about all the investments you've made in being energy efficient and so forth, then what went wrong with the rate hike proposal so far?
Can I
Like
come
looking
back
back
to
on
that? Can I
it.
come back to that?
Right, like what?
I like to
went
kind of
wrong?
finish laying out
Okay.
the story,
Okay.
and then then I'm happy to come back to that point.
Okay.
Okay, so we talked about reliability. It's 40% more reliable than the industry average. And part of what we're doing is also to fund reliability-related projects. We're spending a couple of $100 million a year on what I call making the system more hardened to hurricanes. We've accelerated the tree trimming, in part because the regulators have asked us to do it. Part is because we volunteered to do some of it. So it's a mixture of projects that are been mandated by the regulators since the hurricanes, but we have gone above and beyond that on a number of areas to make the system stronger. I started to talk briefly about this, but this Energy Smart Florida is not a project that has direct fuel savings, right? We got $200 million of economic stimulus dollars to do this project.
So the project in DeSoto County.
No,
No.
no, no. This is a different project. This is what's called smart grid technology,
Right.
right?
Right.
And it's a combination of using smart grid technology and using what are called smart meters.
Grid being the system through which
Right.
power is delivered to homes and
Exactly.
businesses.
It's what the big lines, the big transmission lines, distribution lines, and it's also providing what are called smart meters that would be in every customer premise. And people then could be able, you can look in your computer, you can access it from your job on the internet. At some point, you probably will be able to make decisions about appliances, what appliances you want to use, how much, if your consumption is at a certain level, you turn off certain lights. It will also allow you to look at, what your consumption is on a real-time basis, without having to go read the meter and try to calculate where you are and what it means. There are a number of areas in the country that are actually a little bit further ahead than we are in doing this. We think this is a critical component of continuing to improve the service that we provide. By the way, it does other things, like we'll know now, depending on where you live, we probably don't know if your lights go out. If you put this system in, we'll know when your lights, even if you're the only person who lost power, we will know that immediately in a way we
Individual
can't,
home.
in a way we can't today. So, has lots of benefits.
How long do you think you envision for development?
We have pretty well finished testing all the technology. So we have about 100,000 customers, but we don't have the whole infrastructure around it. So we know the meters work, we know how to read them, we know how to provide you the information. What we haven't done is what, frankly, the economic stimulus dollars are going to allow us to do. But we're not, obviously, this is not something the customers pay for. The federal, actually, they do ultimately.
One way or the
Through
other.
taxes, they ultimately will.
Is every
But it's-
customer going to have a
Every
smart meter?
customer, there are few exceptions of large commercial industrial customers. So I've always learned to give a caveat when I talk to the press, because somebody will say, I'm not getting that, but
By
Well, where
when-
are
virtually all residential
In
customers.
other states where these meters have gone in, has usage decreased?
It depends on how you do it, right? And no one has it all done yet. No one has all of the pieces in place yet. California is further along in terms of installations, but they haven't been operating it long enough for us. And it will depend on what policies you have in place. It will depend to some extent, Susan, on how you price the electricity. So if you price electricity to match completely your costs, right? So the costs to generate electricity are highest during the peak demand periods for our system is from about 3 o'clock until about 8 o'clock at night. So if you price it, try to reflect that, we still have a lot to learn. Said a different way, we still have a lot to learn about customer behavior. But we do think it's important that people have options.
And the information, Susan. This is a function of providing the customers the information so they can make better choices. So they'll be able to see, as an example, specifically, how much is my refrigerator consuming? And if it's a really older fridge, then with that information, they can say, I will save this amount of money, and is it worth replacing that appliance? And the new appliances are gonna actually talk directly with the meter, and then can also then go on and talk to maintenance, as an example. It'll empower customers to make better choices.
Let me suggest that we kind of move on.
This
Sure.
will be paid for a combination of stimulus money and the base rate increase?
Yes, yes.
Does it
Uh,
require
And by the way,
changing lines?
I'm sorry?
Does it require changing transmission lines?
Not a change in transmission line, but part of what the economics, the portion that's tied to the economic stimulus dollars, what it will do is it puts in more sophisticated electronic devices that monitor the transmission grid on a more, it provide you more data about what's going on in the transmission grid at any one point in time. We've already started to build something we call a diagnostic center, which is kind of a more detailed, more thorough view of what's happening in the transmission grid at any point in time. And so this allows us to do that part of it.
It
I
goes
should
well
tell you
beyond
that-
the meter, though.
And
It
who is
does-
it-
It
who is
does, you have to do
getting
things through the transmission, distribution, substations. I mean, it's the grid itself has to be,
I'm sorry, I didn't,
Who is going to
Apologize.
get this?
Who is gonna get these new meters?
Everybody.
Everybody.
Wha-
And I was gonna say,
You're doing it when first?
right now, we already have 100,000 meters in Broward County
Okay.
that have this. And that's really where we have been piloting the technology.
Okay, and when do I get mine?
It all depends.
'Cause
It all depends.
I need my
On-
refrigerator to talk to.
On the current, actually, some of the the reason that, I don't want to take a huge amount of time because I know you have other questions, but the reason we partnered with Cisco, General Electric, Silver Spring Networks is because GE and Cisco both are working on technology. You know, a number of the new, if you bought a new refrigerator recently, the chances are it already has some of this intelligence built into the refrigerator, but we don't have the technology that will talk to that, the chip that you already have inside your refrigerator. And so these guys, you know, FPL doesn't do this, but this is what GE and Cisco do. They're creating the networks that can talk to your appliances if that's what you want to do. By the way, this is a customer choice, so if you don't want
Does this mean, your wife's gonna know when you go in and sneak a beer from the fridge?
to, probably, some of them can
She'll know when the door's been opened.
Some of them can do that.
Good to
The
know.
next 3 to 5 years, we're rolling it out.
So
now.
to answer your
So-
question, you live in Palm Beach County,
Yes.
right? Palm Beach County, probably on this timeline, it's in 2011, 2012 timeframe. I mean, our goal, frankly, is to be essentially done by 2013, if we're able to stay on kind of this
In all 35
the
counties.
timeline we're on. I do want to spend a minute talking about clean, because this is really important. I think we are great believers in having climate change legislation. We've talked about that in the past. We believe strongly that there should be a price on carbon. We have supported cap and trade, frankly, as sort of an industry compromise. We think that there are other ways that you can do this, including a carbon tax.
Tax, right.
And, we have been making investments for a long time to make the system more efficient, to reduce our emissions. And this is just an interesting factoid to me that, if every utility in our sector is not quite half of all the carbon dioxide emissions in this country, that if every utility had our emissions profile, that's the equivalent of taking 8 out of 10 cars off the road.
National.
Which is a huge, huge
One big
impact.
reason, aside from the efficiency you talk about, is you're very, very low on coal.
Exactly
correct?
right.
That's,
Exactly
and,
right.
And again, to just make a point for people watching, the utility industry is the single largest emitter of
It's
greenhouse gas,
It's,
right?
it's almost equivalent to transportation. It's, depending who's doing the math, but I think of it mostly just about the same as transportation, right?
Right.
And most of that transportation, frankly, is the cars we all drive,
Right.
that produce all that CO2.
It's also the reduction in oil over the years. We've modernized
Which is-
more
Yeah.
plants than anybody in the nation by switching them from oil to natural gas, and that emissions has also, that profile
Right.
has significantly increased,
Right.
our ability to remove carbon.
So, which is also, by the way, why we have made so much investments in renewable technologies. And that our sister company, NextEra, is the largest generator of wind energy in the U.S., the largest generator of solar, number 2 in the world in wind. We pursued solar projects in Florida. We think they make a lot of sense in Florida. Florida, when we finish these 3 projects, which Eric developed, we will be number 2 in terms of solar energy in the United States, second only to California. We think Florida should be doing a lot more of this. We think Florida has an opportunity to really be a leader and actually use this as a vehicle to create jobs. And what the critics will say about solar is they will say that the initial cost is too high. And, our counter to that, yes, it is higher. It's higher than building a conventional combined cycle natural gas fired plant. But what we would say is, it's completely, particularly if it's a photovoltaic technology, it's completely environmentally benign. It doesn't use water. It doesn't emit anything. And it's a free fuel. It's a zero cost fuel. So in our minds, this is also one other way that you try to insulate yourself from, being overly dependent. And mind you, we have a long ways to go in Florida, but this is a significant start. And this is one that we can build on.
Since we're on that topic, do you think that the legislature has been aggressive enough on pushing renewable energy in Florida?
No. We have worked hard to sort of try to sell the case. In the last legislative session, the House approved, and by the way, we try to say, how do we sell this in the simplest possible way? Without having it get caught in debates about the science of climate change and so forth. And what we have really try to sell is the concept of let's build a set number of megawatts in Florida every year. If you're worried, really to try to balance the people who are saying this is too expensive and all that, say, allow us to build
Megawatts of solar.
megawatts of solar. So I said, allow us to build 300 to 500 megawatts of solar every year. That has a pretty minimal impact on the bill, has huge impact on, sort of how, on the environment, begins to build really a significant quantity of solar that's a zero-cost fuel. And frankly, if you have predictability, you're going to be able to attract jobs. You're going to be able to attract manufacturing facilities. One of the reasons we haven't been successful in Florida in getting manufacturing facilities, I mean, we should be able to, even in a crummy day like today, we have sun. And we should be able to attract factories, solar factories in Florida. The reason we can't get it is because it's been done in kind of stop and starts, right? So we got approval to do these. The approval, we built this, there was no approval to build any more than this. And so to do more requires sort of a commitment to say, every year for the next 10 years, in Florida, we'll build 300 to 500 megawatts of solar. If you make that kind of legislation, you're going to be able to create jobs, because we'll be able to talk to manufacturers and say, come on down, we have enough work for you for 10 years.
We already have a commitment from a major solar manufacturer in the world to locate not only research and development, but a factory here in Florida, if they see the commitment in Florida. And just 2 weeks ago, we lost an opportunity to have a Chinese manufacturer come to Florida, and instead they went to Arizona, and they're buying other parts from a plant that's being built in Texas. And so the other states are out there right now attracting these investors in solar manufacturing. It's not a question of if there's going to be additional manufacturing facilities built in the United States. It's only a question of where. And right now, Arizona and Texas and Michigan and Pennsylvania are leading the charge on getting those factories. I mean, a recent factory was just announced in Pennsylvania that should have been built here in Florida because we're a purchaser of a lot of that equipment. And it's frustrating because there's a real opportunity. These are high-paying, permanent, clean tech jobs.
In other words, if you get more investment, the jobs will come to where there's the closest market.
Absolutely.
And
where do they see, sorry.
Right, and we have great opportunity here in Florida because of our infrastructure and ports and the ability to export to other parts around the world where we can be a center of excellence for solar research and development and then manufacturing. And look at how Austin, Texas built a high-tech industry back in the 80s from basically one or two companies that went there, IBM, and then Texas Instruments, and then 3M. Now they are a hub of research and development and high tech.
I mentioned Dell in there too.
Yeah.
But Dell, in the early 80s,
Right,
he was in college for his one semester or whatever.
But,
'cause I was there.
but that led to Dell.
But it did lead to them staying there because it was already that critical mass, and then it begins to feed on itself.
And by the way, and here you have a company that has the experience constructing and operating these facilities. Right? We've got the know-how to make this stuff happen and to make it happen on pretty short notice.
And the prices are coming down dramatically. As an example, the DeSoto project itself came in $22 million under budget. And a lot of that is because we learned very early on in the process new techniques that had never been done before and applied those in the installation of all 90,000 panels. And of course, when you go out and you build at scale like we're doing, and you go to a manufacturer and you ask them for pricing, and you say, look, I'd like to buy an entire line of production for a year, you get a different price than if you say, I'd like to buy a truck of solar panels, you know, a truckload.
Right.
It's the
Yeah.
Costco approach.
It's
And-
the solar panel itself that keeps going
Can we
down.
set a little time for questions?
Sure, let me try to go through this, and I don't want to gloss over the efficiency though. And, you know, Florida and FPL have a great track record in efficiency. You know, we have been, Florida has led the pack for a long, long time. Doesn't mean we can't do more, and we can talk about that more if you like. But, you know, our peak demand is only 2% of the U.S. peak demand, and yet we've implemented 13% of the energy efficiency in this country. And I think it's been done in a cost-effective way so that everybody has benefited from the programs that we have done. And when we think about the business, we always think that energy efficiency is the first fuel. So, you know, we've talked about a lot of different things. We haven't talked about nuclear, but we've talked about making the combined cycle plants more efficient. We've talked about renewables. Efficiency it's a very important part of the equation as well as nuclear. So this is something we've talked to you at length. I mean, you know, there are two major plants that are scheduled to be modernized. One is Cape Canaveral, one is Riviera Beach. And, you know, these two plants will continue to help us in this track of reducing the fuel consumption. So by 2014, by the time the Riviera plant comes on board, you know, we believe that we'll get another significant chunk of improvement in our efficiency, translated to roughly $1 billion.
I mean, 35% of our fuel will be burned at Riviera, the new plant, than the current plant. And then you get all the environmental benefits, including a 52% reduction in CO2. And then, of course, it's a $1.3 billion investment here in Palm Beach County, which translates into about over $200 million in new tax revenue for this county, for the city of Riviera Beach and the county and the school district. So it is jobs, it's investment at a time when we need it, but the fuel efficiency alone ends up, over time, paying for that plant. And that's what has been approved, and we fast-tracked the permitting, so we just received our final permit from the state to be able to move forward. Now, of course, that has a clock on it. But to Marno's point earlier, that's one of the projects that we have to be able to go out to the market and borrow money to pay for, to build.
Cost of over $1 billion
Billion.
to do Riviera.
$1.3
So,
billion.
you know, I know you want to make sure, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for Q&A. I mean, we are the largest taxpayer in the state of Florida. I don't know if you know that. Property taxes, FPL pays more property taxes than anybody else. We are a huge tax collection machine. We collect gross receipts taxes for the state. In some areas, we collect for local taxes. We collect franchise fees. And so we have a huge impact on the local economies. And frankly, we have an impact on the state of Florida just by our sheer size. We pay over $300 million in property taxes alone. And as Eric told you, we will pay a lot more property taxes in Palm Beach County if we're able to do Riviera Beach. How much did West County add in property taxes?
I don't remember the number, but it is significant. I mean, it's several $100 million there as well. Because that's, you know, that's an investment that
So
combines several million.
while this is not a reason enough for, you know, giving us the green light to do these projects, they are an added benefit to projects that have already been approved by and already been vetted as providing benefits to customers over the long term. So, as I,
Is that the answer to my question then, that you would still go forward with those?
no, I'm gonna come back to that. I have two questions pending, one from Susan and one from you, and I haven't forgotten. I just want to, let me just kind of finish the pitch and then I'll go. So look, part of what we're asking for is to be allowed to continue doing what we have been doing. And we believe that has been kind of a win-win combination. It's been a win for customers because we've been able to keep our rates low. We have high levels of reliability. We've been able to keep improving emissions. We think we can do more with kind of the right policies in place in the state of Florida. And this rate case frankly is about being able to continue that. We can't continue to do these projects without having the right financial incentives, having the right kinds of financial returns. I'm debating in my mind which were the two questions to answer first. So let me start.
Susan's
You asked.
first, I'm sure.
You want Susan? What? Well,
Anyway.
let me answer the two questions. You want me to answer Susan first?
Sure.
You know, the rate case filing, I think, suffered, and I'll take responsibility.
Question just to remind people is, how did things go so wrong?
Right. You know, I became, you know, I thought our story was so compelling and so confident that, you know, we, with perfect hindsight, didn't spend enough time telling our side of the story. We did a poll not that long ago, Tim and his people, that showed that, you know, most customers didn't realize that their bills were gonna go down next year. And so, and that's sort of central to all of this, because we're saying, look, you know, and most customers don't realize that they pay the lowest electric rates in the state of Florida. Most FPL customers don't know that. And instead, you know, we have gotten caught in really appearances of sort of improper interactions between the company and staff, regulatory staff, and, you know, aircraft and executive salaries. And, you know, with perfect hindsight, I think we would have made a lot more effort to get the side of the story that I'm trying to talk about today, which is why I'm here, and I thank you for taking the time to meet with us and to talk to us. But I think, and frankly, some of it is error in judgment, right? While
Whose judgment?
some of it is error in judgment on our part. While you know, they have, all these investigations have found nothing illegal, right? Inspector General of the PSC, the FDLE came out and said that there'd been no violations. It doesn't look good. You know, when you hear people say that, you know, we have staff communicating with PSC staff via BlackBerry
Right,
pins.
secret PIN numbers.
Right, that, you know, while, you know, it.
Was the
there-
lawyer authorized to do that?
I'm sorry?
Was your lawyer in Tallahassee authorized to do that?
No, but it wasn't, how do I say it? I didn't know that they were doing it, but that's not an excuse. You know, I think that they thought, well, it's no different than talking to somebody, which is allowed. I mean, they are allowed to talk. I
Sure.
think that was part of the logic of saying, well, if you're allowed to talk and nobody, that's not a recorded conversation, you're okay doing pinning. But it undermines credibility. It undermines the credibility of our company. It undermines the credibility of the regulators. You know, with perfect hindsight, it was poor judgment. Poor judgment was exercised.
Would you be
and-
willing to say now that it would be a good thing if not just FPL, but representatives from any utility in dealing with the PSC only met with commissioners and their staff in their offices?
Well, we have, one thing we have done is we have banned the use of pinning outside the company. So
Okay.
you can't pin people outside FPL. But, you know, I think I don't want to get too far down on what the restructuring process is. In part because I think what we have, you know, has done well, has worked well for people. And if you look at one of the measures in my mind is what rates do people in Florida pay compared to elsewhere in the United States. And we pay some of the lowest rates, and I'm not talking about now just the FPL, but in general, the average electric rates in Florida are less than the national average.
Sure, but if we could get back to the
But let-
PSC issue just for a second.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back to that, Randy.
Okay, all right.
So I have plenty of practice after testifying for 3 days. So, look, so something has worked. And so we have to be careful when we look at what do we change. We have to make sure that in the process, we don't throw out the things that have worked. I do agree that some actions or some measures are needed to ensure that we rebuild public trust and public confidence. And part of that has to be transparency. We got to have complete transparency between what the companies are doing, what the interveners, and what the regulators are doing. That is key to transparency. But how do you achieve that? I learned long ago, the devil is in the details. And so Florida can take any number of paths. And I know, and I thank you for printing an op-ed piece on, look, we should look at what other states are doing, right? Is there a best practices out there that makes sense for Florida? And I haven't done, by the way, I'm scheduled to meet with my people soon, before the end of the year, to go through, I'd like to understand better what.
Is the company doing a review of
We
how
are.
you
Internally,
interact with the regulators?
Yeah, internally, we absolutely have. We did an own internal investigation after these allegations came out. Came to the same conclusions that both the Inspector General and FDLE came out. But I think we're beyond that now. We're not talking about whether laws were broken. We're talking about building public trust and
right?
Perceptions and confidence. And you know this better than I, how important that is. I mean, this whole regulatory process has to work on a belief that, customers feel like at the end of the day, they're going to get a fair shake. But at the same time, the companies have to feel like they're going to get a fair shake to be able to invest the zillions of dollars that we're talking about in investing. So,
And the standards and the rules apply to everybody.
So we have to, I was just going to go there. We just have to say, look, let's find out what the best practices are. Be mindful that a lot of what we have done in Florida have resulted in good things for customers. And the other thing is, whatever we do should apply to everybody. It shouldn't just apply, it should apply to all the utilities, it should apply to all the interveners, anybody who participates in the process. And I'm just not prepared today to be particularly prescriptive, because I don't think I understand enough yet what other companies are, what other states are doing. But we are doing that internally.
Well, have you discussed internally whether one way to win back public trust is to reduce the amount of the rate increase you're requesting?
To reduce the request is to say a lot of the things that we've talked about today aren't going to get done. And these are things that, we believe will save customers money. And they're the right things for the customers to do in the long term. And then if I can answer
Joel's question,
which is, look, if we have a bad outcome, and you can define bad outcome a number of ways, but an outcome that everything would have to be on the table at that point.
This is in terms of what would or would not get done if you don't get the rate increase.
Exactly. And, certainly, at the end of the day, you can't spend money you don't have. So, for sure, a number of capital projects would not get done, certainly would not get done in the kind of time frame that we're talking about. If the cuts are severe enough, we'd have to look at jobs, both construction jobs, people that are currently working in construction jobs, and we'd have to look internally and see, is there something else that we need to do?
And the vendor impact.
And there's something like 240 vendors, by the way, that are dependent on all these, that are getting business from us and all these construction projects. And so they would be affected as well.
Let me ask a
So
related.
everything would have to be on the
Just to
table.
follow up, though,
Sure, go ahead.
specifically Riviera Beach, you said that the project basically pays for itself through its savings. So would that be on the table?
But it only pays for itself if we can pay for the project. Right? It only pays for itself if we're able to raise the money and we can assure investors that there will be a return associated with that investment.
And
And
remember,
so remember, it's a $1.3 billion, right? And we don't have $1.3 billion sitting in a bank account just to invest in this project. So we'd have to go out and I go out a lot to talk to investors, and I sell them on Florida. I sell them on the regulatory climate we have in Florida that has a long history of being forward-looking and being willing to approve projects like this, knowing that at some point in time we have to pay for it, but they're willing to let base rates maybe go up to get some of the fuel savings that go with it. So, Riviera would very much be on the table, to answer your question.
And if the cost of capital, in other words, if FPL is downgraded from a credit rating perspective, the market is not willing to loan the money at the same rate. So if we're paying more for it, the economics of the projects change. And we have to look at it then and see if it still makes sense, even from a long-term perspective, because it's just no different than your mortgage going up and saying, now can I afford that house? Because, the cost to borrow has gone higher.
Significantly higher cost of borrowing obviously changes the economics.
If you do not get the rate increase, you are allowed to appeal to the Florida Supreme Court. Do you intend to do that if you don't get the rate increase?
Oh, I think it's premature, and frankly, I preserve all options today, except that I would say to you that if the outcome is so bad that we have to appeal to the Supreme Court, we have a more fundamental problem than that, because it will send a signal that the kinds of investments that have been approved and the kind of sort of constructive regulatory climate that we have in Florida has changed. And that would have far-reaching consequences in terms of how investors view Florida, how investors view investing in electric infrastructure in Florida. And that, in my mind, would be far bigger impact and far more reaching consequences than sort of the legal maneuvering. I hate lawsuits, and I hate having to work with attorneys, and I do that every day of my life. But I find that those are not good long-term policy. You don't want to set policy in the courts. You don't want to set policy affecting infrastructure in a state as big as Florida through the court system. It has to be done with political leadership. We've got to have the right political leadership, and we have to have policymakers that are forward-thinking.
Right, but there is roughly a $1.65 billion difference between what you are asking for and what the Office of Public Counsel is asking for in terms of what you would get or what you would give back.
Correct.
Can we assume that there is a level below which you don't think you'll have enough money to do these things and would justify appealing to the Supreme Court?
Absolutely. There's a level that we...
Would you like to tell us what it is?
No, I'm not willing, because there's so many variables. There isn't a simple one line that I can give you that says it has to do with, depreciation, what kind of depreciation rates, what kind of capital structure they recommend, what kind of return on equity they recommend. They're like 5 or 6 moving
Because it will be a
pieces.
two-part ruling, one on the money and then a bit on how it would.
Right. So I'm not prepared today to speculate on that, but I do want to push back with you on that. It is not. I don't think that a bad outcome. I mean, we may go to the Supreme Court. I don't want to preclude that, but a bad outcome ultimately, for the long term, can't get resolved at the Supreme Court. It has to get resolved by the policymakers. It has to get resolved by the political leaders in the state of Florida.
How would you describe Governor Chris' attitude toward utility regulation?
Well, I think he's trying to do what he thinks is right, and he's trying to do what he thinks is best for the people of Florida. And in some ways, he is reflecting, a lot of the coverage and a lot of the sentiment that has come out as a result of this case.
But can you get a fair hearing?
I hope so.
Susan? We just can try to get a couple more.
So the
in.
ramifications, if you don't get the rate increase you want, is a lot of projects will be on the table.
Absolutely.
But
Everything would be on the table.
Your solar plants are already funded? Or
The solar plants will be finished, right? They're pretty far along.
The ones that are in construction, but we have future plans
Right.
that would be.
Yeah, as I said earlier, we like to build, another 300 to 500 megawatts a year of solar.
If there was new legislation to pass.
We think it's the right thing for Florida. It goes back to, the Florida Supreme Court can't fix that, right? They can't, the Florida Supreme Court or the legal system can't say, go build solar, at least not my non-attorney interpretation. They're not gonna tell us, don't go build solar facilities. Or, you know, we want to keep making investments in efficiency, and we wanted lower emissions in Florida. Those are policymakers, those are political leaders who want to do that.
So are you worried about the direction the PSC is taking with 2 new members and the new chairman, and has the tone changed? And there was the pipeline proposal that didn't go the way you wanted. The conservation goals, that didn't go the way you wanted, and the rate increases on the table. I mean, you feel like
Well, let me
the world
take
is against you, or?
No, I'm not, I'm paranoid, but I'm not that paranoid. Look, what was it, Andy Grove, who said that the longer you're CEO, the more paranoid you get. I don't know if you ever read that book, but it's so I have a healthy, what?
Intel.
Intel, that's
Yeah.
right. So, let me try to answer your questions in the order that I remember them, Susan. The Public Service Commission, the concern is you have a lot of new players in the commission. And so these are complicated matters, and, you know, which have lots of implications. You know, we spent 3 weeks testifying and putting on some mind-numbing testimony on issues, frankly, that they go beyond financial. They're utility-specific accounting stuff. And so they will be asked to rule on, I think there's something like 100 issues, some of which I've had to spend days understanding them, frankly. And so it's very, very complicated, and you do worry about making sure that the people who are voting on these things have an understanding of what the issues are, and what the options that they have, and what are the implications of those decisions. Do I worry about that? Absolutely. You talked about, let me just comment on the pipeline for a second. You know, we had 60 proposals, 7 different pipelines bid, all these combinations of these proposals. We spent $10 million developing this project. It's not, even for FPL, this is not chump change. And it takes money to go through this. We went through an RFP, we spent $10 million, we had 7 pipelines bid on it. When the commission says, we're not sure that you presented the lowest cost option, I'm still scratching my head trying to figure out, you know, what is it that we have to do to convince them of what is the lowest cost option? And we haven't decided, and frankly, it's not a decision that we will make until after the rate case, with, you know, what's the next step on the pipeline. But I do want you to make sure you understand that, you know, we spent a lot of time and effort and money getting to what we did. And it's not cheap. So to start through that process again, I don't know. Energy efficiency. I absolutely support energy efficiency. It's the right thing for us to do. It should be the first fuel. A lot of the discussion, which gets lost in, again, you know, it's easy to, and you saw the record. You know, we have a great record in doing energy efficiency. The question really is, what is the most efficient way to deliver that energy efficiency? And this is where we have differences with some of our environmental friends that we hold hands with at the legislature on renewable energies. We disagree with them on this. And where I disagree is who pays and what is the best vehicle to make that happen. So, for example, in Florida, there's certain minimum efficiency standards for air conditioning. And so when you go replace your air conditioner, you automatically get a higher efficiency air conditioner. You know, we pay people a rebate for that. But essentially, you sort of have to buy this. So, you know, at one point, does the math work out that the fact that Randy saves, you know, 100 kilowatt hours, why should you pay to subsidize Randy receiving 100 kilowatt hours of reduction? Another example is the compact fluorescent bulbs. I absolutely think FPL is not the right vehicle to give people compact fluorescent bulbs. The last time I looked, you could go to Home Depot and buy a compact, you can buy a pack of these compact fluorescent bulbs for $1.30. I worked out, I did the math, $1.34 per bulb. You think we can deliver a compact fluorescent bulb for $1.34? We don't have the distribution channels, we don't have the purchasing. It's not efficient. So to say, you know, we should do that and spread that across all the bills of all the customers makes no sense to me.
Well, the 15 million a year that you've been told you have to spend on this.
We don't know exactly how it's gonna be,
It's gonna
but
cost each customer 18 cents a month?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you have any idea, is that right?
we don't know
That's
yet
what-
exactly how it's
It's
gonna
gonna be a lot
be.
more than 18 cents a month.
It will be a lot
Oh,
more.
really?
Oh, significantly more than
Why
18
was I
cents
told
a
that
month.
the other day?
Well, that's one piece. The 15 is one piece
Right.
of the overall, and
What,
Eric
do you
is
have any idea
responding
what
to
your
the.
plan's gonna be like?
We don't
Incentives,
know. We have to
rebates?
file the plans now.
Right.
But I want to make sure you understand, Susan, the differences are about, you know, not whether a lot of these projects are the right things to do. Yes, absolutely. You know, people should be, that you should be getting compact fluorescent bulbs. It's a no-brainer. But FPL is not the right vehicle. Go to Home Depot and buy it, and other people shouldn't subsidize. You know, and because honestly, you know, I pride myself on being efficient, and part of it is knowing what you can do well and what you can't do well. And buying light bulbs and delivering light bulbs to 4.5 million customers is not what we do well, and it's not the right, and so.
Not even sure it's what you do at this
We, well,
point.
that's
Well,
what I
we
don't,
have.
we have done it,
We've
by
done
the
it.
way. We have done it. You get a free light bulb when you have your home energy
Well, Nancy
service.
Argenziano's the one who's been promoting this whole light bulb.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed
She's
to
the new
it.
chair.
Yeah, and I want to make sure you understand, I'm not opposed to it. I just don't think we are the best vehicle to do it. Not when it's $1.34 and you can go to Home Depot and buy it cheaper than FPL could deliver it.
Makes sense for you to do it.
Yeah,
on
that's
your
the,
own.
that's,
Developing your plan, but you don't know yet.
we
what
don't have,
your
we
plan
haven't.
is.
And frankly, I've been
It's not gonna
so,
be 18 cents a month, but
we don't
well,
know.
can't we just divide the 15 million up? somehow?
Susan, don't give us a number, you get me in trouble. We
Right.
don't know yet, because we don't have a number,
All
but,
the programs have to be built, we have to figure
Yeah.
out what works in the system. It's very complicated,
But-
so we are working on it, but no, it's
but
not gonna
again, please, I think, you know, if I get anything out of this, this discussion with you today, is, you know, it's important to clarify, we are not opposed to energy efficient, and it's not a win-lose.
No one thinks
We're
that.
number one
Yeah,
in the nation.
because at the end of the day, you know, frankly, the costs get passed through, so it doesn't have a real financial impact. But I hate to hang stuff on the bill that I don't think is the most efficient, the most cost-effective. That's what this is about. Randy, I gotta go.
You've been very good with your time. Thank you.
No, thank you for having us.
Well-
I really appreciate it, and, you know, shame on me for not coming sooner, but I appreciate that you're still willing to talk to me.
Always have a home at the Palm Beach Post, you know that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Pleasure.
Good to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Sorry, a little out there.